we'll be stopping this a little bit earlier than we anticipated. My name is Marty Hemwell. I'm co-chair of the 19th Amendment. Louder? Okay, I'll talk louder. Last time I did this, I started echoing. Is that better?
Make sure it's recording.
Okay, good. The 19th Amendment Centennial Coalition is glad to welcome you to this event. I'm the co-chair of that, along with Linda Biella, who you'll hear from later. And we are been planning this for over a year. We have much to celebrate since the passage of the 19th Amendment, which was 100 years ago in 1920. So that's why 2020 is a big year for us to celebrate. We thought this was going to be one event, but it's now turned out to be a year-long celebration of a lot of different things. So you'll see all those on your table, various things that we're doing. Anyway, we have much to learn about how we acquired the right to vote, and I've got to tell you, everybody on the committee has learned a lot about that as we've done our research. We didn't know, for instance, the influence of Indigenous women on the early suffrage movement, so that was something I learned and we're going to learn about today. And so much of this year is going to be talking about some of those lost voices in the history of the amendment. And we're also going to celebrate what's to come as we keep working towards achieving true equality. Our year-long project is a way for us to learn and celebrate together, and so it's great to begin today. I wanted to make note right away that the coalition consists of 5 women's groups in town. The League of Women Voters started working on this project a few years ago. I'm thinking we needed to make this a major event, but it came to us that by ourselves we're nothing. Women together are everything, and we needed to figure out ways to connect more broadly out in the community. So 5 women's groups have joined together in the planning of this. It includes, and these also are symbolized by the color of the ribbons on your table. The teal ribbon represents the American Association of University Women of Appleton. The red ribbons represent Delta Sigma Theta Northeast Wisconsin Alumni Chapter. The black ribbon, League of Women Voters of Appleton. The green ribbon, Midday Women's Alliance. And finally, the purple ribbon represents the Women's Fund of the Fox Valley region. And I would love to have the members of the steering committee members from all those groups stand up now so we can just recognize all the work you've put in. So before we start into the actual program, I just have a couple of business items to announce. First of all, the silent auction is going to be ending at the end of my remarks, so you may get up and do final bids if you want to. I will not take it personally. We have fabulous items on the silent auction. If you haven't looked, it's time to look at those, and many thanks to the people that worked on those baskets. The second thing is we had a little bit of a snafu. The box of books that the speaker had sent ahead that was supposed to arrive yesterday have not arrived. So we had hoped to have a book signing and purchase of books at the end of this program. Instead, you'll see a blank sheet of paper on your table. If you're interested in purchasing a book, if you would put your name and address and contact information for an invoice, she will be glad to send you those books and get those to you as soon as possible. So we really appreciate Dr. Rush Wagner being able to do that for us. And you never know about mail these days. I hear it's pretty unpredictable in the holiday season. All right. I want to just take a second to acknowledge partners. In addition to the coalition partners, many have helped us make this event possible and all the events during 2020 through financial and in-kind contributions. We have a lovely setting for our kickoff only because the Fox Cities Performing Arts Center has partnered with us for this event today. And we really appreciate, I can't imagine a more gorgeous setting to have this kickoff brunch in, so we really appreciate it. I want to introduce its president and CEO, Maria von Manen.
I am so honored to have all of you here today for kicking off this amazing series of events. Those of you who know me know that I am very, very passionate about the way the arts can engage people to see different issues and enter into conversations with a much more open mind in a much more compassionate way. And while that's very, very important, the ultimate is how you then take action on that newly found inspiration and connection. And a big part of that is our right to vote. And that is how we make sure our voice is heard. We need to make sure that we are mobilizing and that we are taking full advantage of what so many women work so hard to make sure we have the ability to do. So I'm thrilled to have you all here. Thank you for being here, thank you for being engaged, and thank you for making our community such a great place to be. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Financially, we wouldn't be able to make any of this happen, nor would we have such low ticket prices for today's events without contributors and financial backers. One of our goals for this whole year has been how do we make our events, our educational materials, and all the things that we have learned available to all parts of the community, not just the people that usually show up to these events. And one way to do that is to make all the events either free or accessible. So that's what we've been working really hard on. And we're really thankful to our lead sponsor, the Community Foundation for the Fox Valley region. To introduce Tammy Geeman, Vice President, Community Engagement.
Hello everyone. The Community Foundation is so proud to sponsor this and all of the events in the Centennial series coming up in the next year with a grant from its Bright Idea Fund. As Marty mentioned, this is helping to make the events open to more people in our community, and this aligns with the new vision for the Fox Cities. At imaginefoxcities.com, you can learn more about the vision that includes elements of inclusion and diversity and belonging for everyone, not only today, but for future generations in our community. I would like to acknowledge three special guests that I have with me today. My stepdaughters, Erin and Shannon, and my daughter, Emily. Two things I'd like to mention about them. Shannon is very passionate about making sure that her 89-year-old grandfather always gets out to vote. And my daughter Emily will be turning 18 next year on presidential election day. So she is already planning how she's going to show up early and work around a school schedule because she can't register in advance, so she has to allow extra time to do that. But it's really great to see young women, especially in my family and all through our community, that are so passionate about helping to get out to vote and are passionate about women's rights. So I'd like to thank the 19th Amendment Centennial Coalition for providing an opportunity for people to come together during the next year to celebrate and advance women's empowerment. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Failed to mention the secondary agenda we have here during the whole year, which is a major voter registration drive. And we'll be getting out to all areas of the community, and all the parts of the coalition are actively involved in this, so we're pretty excited about that too, and that'll be one of our measures of success. As you know, none of our organizations are partisan. We're all nonpartisan, so we're not working for candidates. We're working for the fact that democracy only works if we all participate. And everyone needs to vote, no matter what they believe in or what candidate they're supporting. We need to make sure everybody gets out to vote, and that's one of our goals for this year. Okay, just a couple other partners that have made this possible. First, it's inconceivable we could have been as visible with this project without the help of Coalesce Marketing, who has offered their services in kind. President Lisa Piccola and Annie Morris and others from Coalesce have been invaluable. They've helped us gain visibility with publications, website, Facebook, press releases. A lot of it's on your table. You can see what they've designed. It's been fabulous. And if they would stand here, that would be great. I'd like to recognize their contribution. They, along with Andy Vosters, who's helped us develop and sort of navigate our vision and our mission and keeping us focused. Andy, would you please stand? Thank you. I have to say that we heard from some people down in Madison when they looked at our materials on our website and our Facebook page. They said, this is extraordinary. This is better than anything we see coming out of the state right now. So that was pretty cool. So go Fox Valley. Dr. Susan A., president of Fox Valley Technical College, along with the help of Becky Belanger, helped put Fox Valley Technical College as an in-kind sponsor, and they have offered their in-kind services for printing. So all the materials you see on your table, the posters you see around during the year, the programs for events, this is all Fox Valley Technical College. Thank you very much. Finally, thanks to Museum Director Matt Carpenter and Chief Curator Dustin Mack at the History Museum at the Castle. They've helped us negotiate with the Wisconsin Historical Society, which is no small feat, trust me, I was astonished. We had seen an exhibit down in the State House on women's suffrage, and our group said, hey, we want to get some traveling exhibit up here. And it was like, we thought this was a piece of cake, right? Yeah, no, this took months. So anyway, thanks to Matt and Dustin, they helped do this for us. And you'll see the result in back. There are two-sided posters of a traveling exhibit. This exhibit is available for any groups or organizations or places to reserve for up to 2 weeks at a time. And all you need to do is contact Dustin Mack at the History Museum at the Castle. So I would like to recognize their contribution. They've just been tremendously helpful in this event. Matt? Okay, before we begin the official program then, I'd like to just pause for a moment for a land acknowledgement. The U.S. Department of Arts and Culture has reminded us that this is a simple way for us to show respect for Indigenous people and to begin to correct stories which have erased Indigenous people's history and culture and to start honoring the truth. Lawrence University, whose website offered me some of the words for this land acknowledgement, has been offering a land acknowledgement at the beginning of many of their events, and so have other people around the state. The land on which we stand today is located in the ancestral homelands of the Menominee Nation. Currently, there are 11 federally recognized Native American sovereign nations in Wisconsin, and one tribe, the Brothertown tribe, which is not yet federally recognized. We acknowledge these indigenous communities which have stewarded this land throughout our generations and pay respect to their elders, past and present. We also want to acknowledge those who have partnered with the coalition to make this event possible. As you know, today we will be celebrating and learning from women whose voices have been lost in history and how we've gained the right to vote. First, however, we want to celebrate some current women leaders in our own community. I want to introduce Shirley Strange, who will introduce the Making Democracy Work Awards. Shirley.
Hello, everyone. I am chair of the Making Democracy Work Awards, and my cohort here is part of the selection committee. So today we present 2 awards. I have provided short bios for you so that we can have time to hear from the women. I begin with a young woman, a senior at Kimberly High School, Amanda Schmidt. Amanda is receiving the Honorable Mention Award for her leadership skills, her compassion for others, and her ability to inspire. Amanda, we present you, come on up. We present you with a certificate of achievement and a letter from the president of the league for your portfolio. Amanda is also given a year's membership in the League of Women Voters. That includes the Appleton League, the State League, and the National League.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for recognizing me for this. It is such an honor, and I will continue to work hard in the future to make sure that democracy is accessible to all. Thank you.
The Making Democracy Work Youth Award is given to a young woman this year who knows how to persist. Unfortunately, Madeline McDermott is not able to be with us today, but she did receive her award and her scholarship in front of the student body and faculty at Xavier High School. And if you don't think we had fun being in front of a student assembly, yeah, we had a great time. And so now the Appleton League, for the first time, and in celebrating the centennial of the 19th Amendment, present to Marianne Rossi a Lifetime Achievement Award. This award is in the form of a beautifully crafted stained glass designed specifically for Marianne by Christy Meyer. There it is. Okay, I'd like to explain about the design. The basic design of this piece is inspired by a voter's button for women's right to vote, celebrated by our 19th Amendment. The rainbow dichroic strips are an equal sign, which celebrates that in our diversity, we are equal. The moons and Celtic triad, goddess symbols, represent the historian in Marianne and her study of women in ancient societies and religion. Last but not least, the color purple shows the passion and determination Marianne has with ending domestic violence. Marianne, throughout her life, has fought for women to attain equal rights in all aspects of their lives. Her efforts will be appreciated by generations of women to come, inspiring them into carrying on her legacy. Come on up, Marianne.
Thank you so much. This is just beautiful. It's very moving. Very moving. I thank all the members of all these wonderful groups for this outstanding award. I'm overcome, as you can see. But I noticed that you all have on your tables a sheet about me. I can skip all that. I can skip quite a bit more because I have just a few minutes. And so I would like to take the few minutes after I've given my great thanks to all of you for this great honor, and to my wonderful mother, Virginia Rossi, who served in the Connecticut State Legislature for 3 terms in the 1940s. She was a wonderful role model, as you can imagine. And my great family that's always supported me. And my son is here today, Rob Brackenridge, the great comedian. I want to take these few minutes to sum up my activism for women's equality under the law. First of all, I was going to cut this to 2 minutes, and then after a while it got to be 2 hours. So I would dash through some of these as we go through the decades. By the way, I'll be 89 January 25th. And on my 89th birthday, on January 25th, Rob Brackenridge, my son, will be performing with Tom Arnold at the Skyline in Appleton. So I'm going to take you through the decades now, because we just have a few minutes. In the 1960s and 70s, we were forming consciousness-raising groups, founding members of NOW, working to change their laws and fighting to pass the ERA. In the 1980s, with the help of Gloria Steinem and the State Commission, we passed Titles 5, 7, and 9 to give women a fair chance in the workplace and in education and sports. And that was when there was Ms. Magazine too, that's when that started. So there was a lot of spreading around of good information. Now when Governor Dreyfus cut our budget in 1980, he said, "I think I'll let that commission croak." Then we turned around and formed the Wisconsin Women's Network, which is still thriving, as you know, and their newsletter is The Stateswoman, which I hope you all read. So when he did that to us, and the Women's Network started, we carried on with the work we were doing in the state of Wisconsin to make women equal under the law. In the 1990s, we worked on laws against violence against women around the world. And there were world meetings in Mexico City, 75, Houston, 77, Kenya, 85, and Beijing, 1995. We had the great support of Elliot Richardson, JFK Kennedy, Chief Justice Harry Lee Carrico, Chief Justice of the Virginia Supreme Court, who was my son-in-law. He passed away in 96, but he was my son-in-law, and he worked on domestic violence in the state of Virginia as Chief Justice. And the 35 members of the Wisconsin Governor's Commission, we all were working on violence against women. In 1983, I studied in Rome, Italy, and I studied St. Bridget of Sweden. And as I was studying in the Vatican Library, just doing research and going through articles here and there, I came across an article that said notes on the women in the priesthood of the early church. It was in Italian, so I told my friends about it, and they said, "Oh no, that must mean wife of the priest if it says presbytera." I said, "No, it says female priesthood." So I had to translate it. And the BBC got a hold of the script when it was published and put out a documentary, a religious documentary called Hidden History, Women in the Priesthood. And it was seen by 2 million people 3 days before the Anglican Synod voted to accept women into the priesthood. So it was viewed by 2 million people, and they said it might have had a little to do with the vote in the next it was 3 days after that. Now, I want to take you back to 1973, and I have got my eye on watch. I'll take you back to 1973, when I attended my first International Women's Congress at the Harvard Divinity School. There were women and a few men, because John Lennon was there with Yoko Ono, so I know there were a few men there. I always remember that. He was so impressive, and we loved both of them. And there were several hundred women from 23 countries. For 3 days, we gave and listened to papers about women's lives all over the world, 23 countries. Crimes against women, the difficulty that women were having making ends meet all over the world. So we were listening to these papers for 3 days. Now, we come to the last day of this terrific 3-day conference at the Harvard Divinity School. And on the last day, in this huge assembly with everybody attending, there was an Arabian woman giving her last talk. She was just finishing, and people were starting to leave, and she said, "Oh, I was looking for my Israeli sister, and somebody said, she just left, I'll run to get her. And she ran to get her and brought the Israeli woman back, and she walked down the aisle and entered, and we got on the stage, and they embraced. There were more tears then, because everyone was so moved. We realized that it was the essence of our world meeting to find our common personhood and common goals of peace and nonviolence. From that moment, someone stood and made this declaration. In light of our consensus that the oppressed condition and inferior status of women in the world today must be acknowledged and corrected, we hereby declare to the world our belief in the personhood of woman and her right by birth to all the privileges and responsibilities pertaining to the human condition. We shall not ask for more, nor shall we stand for less. Let's go forward and pass that ERA. Remember Susan B. Anthony's words, failure is impossible.
I want to just thank Marty for putting me behind this process. My name is Jean Roberts. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Appleton. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. When we started our work on the Centennial over a year ago, we knew we needed to celebrate all of women's voting history, both that which was written into the history books and that which was left out. From the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, who valued equality and women as leaders, to the Black women's suffrage organizations like Delta Sigma Theta, who fought for the vote knowing that they were unlikely to benefit. And as we know, true suffrage did not happen until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We know that in our country, our diversity is our strength, and our diversity is what makes us great. So for our Centennial kickoff, we decided to start at the beginning, and that's where our speaker is. Dr. Sally Roche Wagner. She was awarded one of the first doctorates in the country for work in women's studies at UC Santa Cruz. And she was a founder of one of the first college-level women's studies programs in the United States at California State University at Sacramento. Dr. Wagner has taught women's studies courses for 50 years. She edited the Intersectional Women's Suffrage Anthology, which is one of the books that is available to you. And she currently serves as an adjunct faculty member in the Renee Crown University Honors Program, in Syracuse University, and the St. John Fisher Executive Leadership Program. Her books, including the book Sisters in Spirit, will be available. We're going to have a paper at all of the tables that you can sign up. She will pay for shipping, and she will autograph the books in any way that you ask. Welcome, Dr. Wagner. Good morning. Good morning. I am really honored to be here. Can you hear me okay? Yes. I was just
doing an interview and realized that while I've been keynoting events all over the country in anticipation of 2020, I think this is the best organized, largest group that I've spoken to. And to be here where you provide the leadership, being the first state to ratify the amendment, I congratulate you, Wisconsin. So, 2020 is a moment when history rises from the back burner to the front burner. You know, history usually is something that is not talked about a lot. It's sort of second-class information. But what we have with 2020 is an opportunity to re-look at our history. And I think we have an opportunity to provide leadership to move beyond the mono-thought that has been the the landmark of Western thought. You are either or. You are good or bad. We have a history that is both celebration and accountability. We have a history that has been that of white women, a small elite group. The story begins in 1848, right, with Seneca Falls, and it's an unbroken line to 1920 in the vote, right? Every piece of that story is wrong. And I want to tell you just a couple of them, and then get to what, for me, is the most important story. As we learned, it is the beginning story. Well, I want to say, first of all, I do have this book available, a few copies, and I will make more available. It's the story of the Haudenosaunee influence. You know what, I want to tell you a fun story about this. My friend Gloria Steinem wrote the foreword, and my students at Syracuse University read the book while it was in manuscript form, and they were to do 10 points of each of the chapters. And the first papers that I got, someone had said, Susan B. Anthony harbored fugitive slaves as one of their major points. And I wrote back to the student and said, you know, I'm sorry, that information is not in my book, and it's not correct. And she responded back, it's in Gloria Steinem's foreword. So I had to write to Gloria and say, would you mind changing that to supported fugitive slaves? And Gloria, of course, is so gracious, and she said, of course. But that student will go through life having corrected Gloria Steinem, which is the way in which history gets created, right? It's not what happened, it's who tells the story. And we are now telling a different collective story. It begins not in 1848. It begins 1,000 years ago when women on this land had political voice, while we're celebrating 100 now. That is sobering in itself, right? We have women among us who have that kind of history, although broken by colonization, not destroyed, severed perhaps, pushed back, but as sovereignty of Native nations is increasingly happening in this historic moment. We have people that we can learn from. Other things that are wrong with that story, that narrative 1848 to 1920, well, I'll just give you a few high points from the book. One of them, women voted in the colonies. Not all of them, and not all women, but women did vote in some of the colonies. And so when the suffragists of the National Woman Suffrage Association were organizing, they said, we're not asking for a new right, we're asking for the restitution of a right that our foremothers had. They knew that information. The movement doesn't begin in 1848, it begins with the forerunner, the women's anti-slavery organizations, the female anti-slavery organizations that were both African American women who started the first one and white women. They worked together, and not only did they work to end slavery, at a time when women were not even supposed to be recognized as sexual beings in any way, and you had to cover the legs of your piano because the erotic nature of seeing naked legs might arouse men's prurient interest. During this time, African American and white women exposed the institutionalized rape of enslaved women. This is the 1830s. They learned every bit of organization that they brought into the women's rights movement in these female anti-slavery societies. They got political voice, they learned how to organize groups, they learned how to do activism in the forms that they could, especially petitions. So by the time 1848 comes along and those 5 women gathered, 4 of them are anti-slavery activists. They know this stuff, and they organize, which is a simple process. They've been doing it for a long time. The exception to that was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was not an organizer in the female anti-slavery societies. So then we move to these teacup ladies who asked for 72 years for the right to vote, right? Wrong. One quick story. 1876, the government is celebrating 100 years of a republic based on the consent of the governed, right? Well, the National Woman Suffrage Association, which is the more radical, the more progressive group, they present illegally at the official July 4th celebration a Declaration of Rights of Women. And they have moved in their convention that they have greater cause for discontent, rebellion, and yes, revolution than did the fathers of 1776, because they were ruled by a foreign despot. But these women, they said, we are ruled by our husbands, our brothers, our fathers, and even our sons. And men in 1776 had local home rule. We have no voice in any part of our lives. And so they risked arrest, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage wrote in the History of Women's Suffrage, we did this knowing that we might be arrested against any mandate to the contrary. We did it not for the women of our time, but we did it for the daughters of 1976, so they would know that their mothers of 1876 had impeached the government for its treatment of women. These were, in the words of my SU students, kick-ass women. Well, you knew that story, right? Everybody learned that in school. Those are the stories we don't learn. And I want to cut to the end of the women's rights. Now I'm going to take a little break in between. The first woman, let me tell you one other quick anecdote. The first woman to announce her candidacy for President of the United States spent election night in jail, arrested under the Comstock Acts for exposing 2 #MeToos in her newspaper. Settle that in for a minute. And then I'm really going to spin your head around. Because this woman was a spiritualist, she was a stockbroker, she was a communist. Oxymoron? A communist stockbroker? Did I say that? Actually. She and her sister got kicked out of the 4th Internationale by Marx for proposing free love. History is much more complicated and fun than what we learn in school. Victoria Woodhull, she was actually in her newspaper the first to print the Communist Manifesto in the United States. She announces her candidacy, but she doesn't run. And then when Belva Lockwood runs for president in 1884 on the Equal Rights Party ticket, she gets the entire electoral vote of Indiana.
Whoa, wow.
A couple of women written out of our history books. I want to tell you one other woman, and she was, how many of you know the name Anthony Comstock? Ah, a couple. Someday everybody in this room should know that name because Anthony Comstock affected the lives of women more than the 19th Amendment did. Anthony Comstock was a religious zealot who was appointed the press censor in the United States and given the power to determine what was obscene in the United States. And what he determined was obscene was anything that had to do with sex or reproduction or a woman's body. In 1903, this is just one of the many cases like this that came out of Comstock. There was a woman who had published a birth control manual, and she was arrested under the Comstock Acts for it, and she was to be sentenced to prison the next day. The judge was going to throw the book at her, had made that clear. Comstock had said once she gets out of prison, she will be rearrested by him for a second birth control manual that she's written. She kills herself the night before she is to be sentenced. She leaves us a suicide note. It's in my anthology. She may be the first martyr to reproductive justice in the United States. The story is much bigger than the vote. While women were working for the vote, it's like if somebody wrote the history of our time and said it was all about the ERA. The ERA is important, and we got to get it passed in 2020, and I am with you, sister. And I really am honored to be on the same stage as you with the work that you have done in your life. Thank you. And the women who are coming up, who will be leading us in the future. So, I forgot where I was. I was so impressed with you both. So, let me just gather my thoughts for a minute.
Suicide.
It's what?
Suicide. The first murder.
She left a suicide note for us.
Yes, she did. Okay, it was not just the vote. And if we give our story today as just the ERA, we're missing a whole lot of other things going on. And a lot of things that are under the surface. The anti-sexist men's movement that is underneath the surface and has been going on since the 60s. And there were men in the first wave of the women's movement who also were extremely supportive, and they've been written out of history. Samuel J. May preached, as far as I know, the first women's rights sermon. And he said to his parishioners in 1845, "How would you feel if your wives made every decision?" Well, that's how they feel. You men need to become more Christ-like, and you women need to become more aggressive, he preached to the congregation. There are men we need to celebrate. Then there's the time of accountability that we must take, and I want to quickly cover that. The movement in 1890, the two wings of the movement joined. And they were joined by the Women's Christian Temperance Union that wanted to put God in the Constitution and Jesus Christ as the head of the government and destroy the wall of separation of church and state, create a religious nation, a Christian nation, which would have meant, Gates said, you know, if we lose the right to religion in this country, which the founding fathers said was the foundation of all other rights, if we lose that, it's not going to matter who votes, because we will have lost freedom in the United States. So you have this unholy, if you will, gathering of women that become more and more and more conservative, and they adopt, ultimately, racism as policy. I want to say that again. Racism as policy. The organization makes the argument publicly, give women the vote because white women outnumber Negroes and immigrants. And women's suffrage is a way to maintain white supremacy and native-born supremacy. That's the place of accountability that we must take. They created a rift between African American and white women that we're still trying to heal today. And I think part of the process of that healing may be a truth and reconciliation in 2020, where there is a public acknowledgement and an apology and a listening to African American women talking about what that loss has meant. And it's meant a loss to all of us. When we think about if they had accepted Ida B. Wells' request that the women's movement work against lynching, how many lives of African American men might have been saved? We see the importance of the voices of women of color today. And in that, we must also recognize and acknowledge what the loss of those voices has meant for all the years that they have been silenced. So I think the part of accountability and the part of celebration need to go hand in hand in 2020. And as we do this as a country, we're thinking George Washington, right? We're thinking Thomas Jefferson. We're re-looking at the heroes that have been held up as iconic, perfect human beings. We, women, celebrating 2020, have the opportunity to re-look at and rethink how we look at our leaders and who we venerate and how we do it with a both and. Our movement was both and. And that can allow us to look at our movement today and the way that we continue to be both and, because acknowledging that, then we can correct. Well, I want to get back now to the real story, which is my Haudenosaunee friends who have political voice and have had it for 1,000 years. The clan mothers, the 5 nations, 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee. The clan mothers have the responsibility for raising the chiefs. Now this makes sense. Living in the longhouse and the way that they lived traditionally, and it's still a form of this happens with traditional people today, the husband comes to live with the wife. So the husband is living with the mother, the father, the married sisters and their husbands, and the children, and the unmarried brothers. When the brothers marry, they go to live with the wife's clan. This makes perfect sense, because then you have a whole team of mothers, right? You don't have a single mom, so if your mother passes, you still have other mothers, and you stay with that clan, and you stay with that family. Kids at Onondaga know who they are through who their mother is, and who their mother's mother is, and who their mother's mother's mother is. See how far back you can go with our patrilineal lineage. Very different. I remember trying to explain to an Onondaga friend about illegitimacy. And she said, "What? A child is illegal? How can a child be illegal?" "Well, the father is not." Well, what does that matter? You always know who your mother is. here's the grandma living with these little boys. And the grandma's a clan mother. And the grandma's watching these little boys, and she's watching them really carefully. And she's watching to see the little boy who doesn't put himself forward. He's playing lacrosse. There's the possibility of a glory, you know, whatever. You know, he could make a goal, but instead he passes it off because he's a team player. If he goes for the goal, he will never become a chief. And he's going to have trouble getting married, because all those women are going to be watching him and going, I don't want to go anywhere near that guy. Yeah, he's too much about himself. So she watches the boy who is quietly listening to what everybody needs and responding. She's looking for that in leadership. And so when the old chief dies, she has groomed this boy, and she raises him up. She asks everybody. And everybody in the clan has a voice, even children. If there was a little girl who said, that man one time touched me and it was wrong, boom, he's out. A chief cannot have committed a murder, he cannot have committed a theft, and he cannot have abused a woman or a child. Now, I don't mean to be controversial here, but you know where I'm going. It started. I just want to tell you that I have had very difficult conversations with clan mother friends about the person that occupies the White House. Because their position is, and I don't mean this, they don't mean this in an evaluative way. It's like trying to get their mind around what kind of a government do you have where the women don't remove a man who has done what that man has been accused of doing. It's just beyond their thought, because he would be out in a minute. So, the women then have the responsibility for removing the chief if he does not carry on his responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is that every decision must be made for the 7th generation. And every decision must be made for the good of the people, not the aggrandizement of the person. If he doesn't listen to the women, he's given a warning. If he doesn't listen for a second time, and there's a whole protocol about how this is done, he's given a second warning. And if he continues on the path and hasn't come around to where he should be, the clan mother has the responsibility to remove him. Now, Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote about, she has the right to cut off his horns. And I remember using that phrase, quoting her at an Elizabeth Cady Stanton birthday tea when I was speaking with a clan mother. And, you know, boy, the feminist crowd with that cut off his horns went wild. The metaphor of, you know, it's the removing of the Gastouille that is the symbol of being the chief. So Audrey gets up, the clan mother, and talks about her responsibilities. And she says, it's the saddest thing I could ever imagine if I had to watch a chief taken down, because it would mean we are so out of balance. And Audrey and I talked later about what's the difference between rights and responsibilities. Well, rights are what you talk about in the absence. Responsibilities are what you have when you have created gender balance. Your goal is to continue the harmony that you've created and maintain that balance. Matilda Jocelyn Gage, who is one of the leaders of the National Women's Suffrage Association, equally important, was Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, written out of history because she went up against the religious fundamentalists that wanted to merge church and state. She also wrote about Native sovereignty and supported Native sovereignty and treaty rights in 1878. The chiefs at Onondaga with the Grand Council had made a decision that they would not accept citizenship in New York State, when New York State in 1878 was considering a bill that would give citizenship to Indian men, and they refused it. And Gage, in her women's suffrage newspaper, it's the official organ of the National Woman Suffrage Association, writes about the support of the decision of the chiefs. And she says they are sovereign nations every bit as much as Canadians and Mexicans, and forcing citizenship on Indians is like forcing it on Canadians or Mexicans. They are sovereign nations. And she says justice to the Indians requires living up to the treaties that we have with them. Well, she's writing in support of Native people throughout her career and as a suffragist. And in 1893, she is arrested for voting in her village of Fayetteville, New York. She's voted for school superintendent, which is a state position when women have only gathered the right to vote in local school board elections. So she's arrested. The same year, she's given an honorary adoption into the Wolf Clan of the Mohawk Nation. And she writes to her daughter and says, "My clan sisters are considering me for a voice in the Council of Matrons." Now here's one of the three most important suffragists of the National Woman Suffrage Association, who is an honorarily adopted Indian who supports treaty rights and sovereignty, and she is arrested in her own nation for voting the same year that she's potentially given a political voice in a Native nation. Another story, you were talking about in 1973, I think it was, Gathering of Women Internationally. And in 1888, women gathered in the United States from the Western world primarily, for the first time on United States soil, to talk about the same issues. What are we dealing with? You know, all the ways in which equal pay for equal work, to violence against women, to, they're talking about this in 1888. The International Council of Women, there's an anthropologist, an early ethnographer, who is also a suffragist, who gets up to tell this story. She's talking about the position of Native women. And she tells a story about how, she said, I was with a group of women. These were women from the Omaha Nation. And I was staying with, you know, my hostess, and one day she gave away a horse. And without thinking about it, I said, hadn't you better check with your husband? And she said, the merriment with which my statement was met, you know, it's like these Native women are looking at her like, what planet are you from, girlfriend? You know, I mean, why would you check with your husband? For a minute, she had forgotten that she was not with United States women who, under the law, until women began to work to change the law, women were considered under common law dead in the law. It wasn't just that we didn't have rights, we had no legal existence. The church, the two shall become one and the one is the man. The punishment for Eve that goes all the way to St. Paul about women will be under the authority of man. And whatever the Bible can be interpreted as today, the way in which it's been interpreted historically led from canon law to common law, with women being under the authority of men. And so you had no right to your child. Husbands could will away an unborn child under state laws. That meant, you're pregnant, he's dying, he writes a will, he dies, you give birth to the child. And when the child can live on its own without your milk, that child is taken out of your arms and given to its rightful owner, and you have no recourse. That was the position of white women. Now imagine what happened when they met Native women. Imagine Lucretia Mott in the summer of 1848. She comes to Waterloo where they plan the Seneca Falls Convention, and she has just come from Cattaraugus, a Seneca community where she watched women plan the spiritual ceremony. Now this is 1848. It isn't until what, 1870 something that Olympia Brown in your own state becomes the first regularly ordained women minister. Up until that point, women were not, and they were following St. Paul, not to speak behind the altar. 1848, she's watching Seneca women plan the strawberry ceremony, having the spiritual authority. She's watching women having political voice as they're deciding the future of their governmental structure. She's watching women have common, comfortable clothing that they can move in when the dress of women, I'll give you an experience. I want you all to sit with your back against the chair as hard as you can and suck in your gut till you can hardly breathe and see how long you can do that, because that is where you would have been 150 years ago in a gathering of women. You would have been corseting since you were 10 years old, and by the time you were my age, you could not stand on your own because your muscles had atrophied. Without your corset, you couldn't even stand upright. Imagine being around women and you're wearing 20 pounds of clothing suspended from your waist, and you're dying in childbirth because all your organs are distended. Imagine you're around women who are physically active. Elizabeth Cady Stanton at one point said, "Why should only Christian women suffer in childbirth?" Actually, I found a missionary early on in contact saying, "Why is it that these Native women give birth so easily?" It must be because they haven't been exposed to the Bible yet. Once we teach them the truth, then they'll know they have to suffer. He later says, well, maybe it has something to do with the way that they live and the way that their level of activity and their clothing and the food they eat and all of that. Lucretia Mott comes from that experience to Seneca Falls. And in my anthology, I have the only account that she wrote about that summer of activity. And ironically, the Seneca Falls Convention is one short paragraph, and her time at Cattaraugus with the Native women is 3 long paragraphs. Now, does that indicate the degree to which she was impacted by each of those events? I don't know. But what we do know is that's the energy she brought into the creation of the Seneca Falls Convention. I want to tell you my own personal feeling about all of this, and it is that in this historic moment, we are facing the very real possibility of the end of life on this planet. That's the biggest overriding reality of our lives, and we do everything we can to avoid that and the knowledge of that. But it is the most immediate, pressing reality for all of us. And I know the tradition I come from. My grandparents were peasant farmers that came here from Russia and settled in South Dakota in 1898. And in that amount of time between then and now, we have removed 12 inches of topsoil. We have poisoned the water. We have poisoned the land. We don't have a track record. We have a track record of a train that is going full force toward the end of life on the planet. And if we don't turn around, we're going to hit that brick wall, and we're going to hit it quicker than we anticipated. Every day we know that, we learn that. For me, the deepest reality is that there are people among us who know how to live with the environment in a respectful way that ensures survival. When I am part of any event with Haudenosaunee that begin with the Thanksgiving address, and it begins, and this is typical of Native indigenous groups, they have the deepest spiritual and scientific knowledge, which is that indeed we are all related. Every bit of life on this planet is interdependent. And when we live with that kind of understanding that we can learn from our indigenous friends, you can't murder entire nations of living beings like we do daily. You can't sit on that train heading toward the end of life and sit quietly. And so for me, I think, most important thing that I'd like to leave you with is that as we approach 2020 and we acknowledge the beginning of women's rights on this Turtle Island, on this nation, that we look to the women who gave us guidance as we began to work for women's rights. And we look to them today for guidance in how we can maintain life on the planet. Thank you. I have to make a confession. Too many rock concerts in the 60s. Actually, my hearing aids turned up high and I couldn't hear you. Would it be possible to get the microphone around? I just want to hear what you said. Thank you.
I did hear you. Too many folk concerts.
They told us not to stand too close to the big speakers. Didn't listen.
Thankfully, I did listen. I still have really good hearing for my age. Anyway, my question to you was, what possessed you to do all this research and write your books?
Well, confession. I grew up hating history. Great men, great wars, great dates had nothing to do with me in my life. So I'm a born-again historian, and we're the biggest pains in the ass. But I have to tell you that, and this is in the form perhaps of a confession, that's a real confession. I never set out to find this connection between Native women and non-Native women. If a graduate student had come to me 30 years ago and said, I think that there may be some way in which suffragists learned from Native women, I would have rolled my eyes. Well, maybe not. Figuratively, in my mind I would have. And I would have said, there's no connection. How could there be any? I'm a recovering racist. It's one day at a time. And it's the cautionary note for me was that I didn't see Matilda Jocelyn Gage's words in 1893 when she said, never was justice more perfect, never was civilization higher. And she was talking about Native women, indigenous women. And I didn't see it. And the reason I didn't see it was because layers and layers and layers underneath all the anti-racist work I'd done, the anti-racist workshops that I'd led, was deeply embedded the idea that Native women were beasts of burden, they were 10 paces behind their husbands. What did they have to teach white women anyway? That is a level of racism that is poisonous to scholarship. I didn't publish anything until Native people asked me to publish. And Sisters in Spirit, every word of this was vetted by Native women at Onondaga Nation. I knew pretty quickly that as a white scholar, the greatest likelihood was that I would get it wrong and I would do damage. And so, I didn't set out on this journey. Kicking and screaming, I got dragged into it. And I had to prove this every way to Sunday to convince myself that there was this connection. But I think the idea of being a recovering racist is that I'm aware that my white privilege goes so deep and there are so many layers to the level of racism that we live in daily that I'm constantly screwing up. And this gets to how I hold my feminist foremothers accountable. My accountability to myself is, if I don't understand it, I might give myself a pass, okay? If I screw up and I don't get it. But my responsibility then is to make myself a person who will never do that again. Because if I do it a second time, that is an act of self-conscious, deliberate racism. And that's where I hold my foremothers accountable, is that it isn't that they didn't ever think about whether they were being racist, they chose it. It was self-conscious, deliberate racism, and they need to be held to account for that. So, you gonna draw one more confession out of me? Question or thought? Yes. I guess there's one here.
I'll yell quickly. I'm just wondering, where are you hopeful for the younger women in our community to be, inspired by what you've learned in your work? So where is the hope?
Where's what?
The hope. Where are you hopeful?
Where am I hopeful?
Especially for the younger women in our communities that you speak to.
Oh, look at Time Magazine Woman of the Year. What I understand is that I and my friend and colleague here, Mary Ann, I think that we did what we could at the time, and we pushed the envelope forward. I proudly have an FBI file. You didn't even pull that confession out. The proudest thing of my life is that for my work in the anti-war movement, and this was before I'd even ever broken the law and committed civil disobedience, which I did later, but the FBI file is just about my anti-war work, and never having broken the law, just opposing the government's policy in Vietnam. There's a form letter in my FBI file that I got through the Freedom of Information Act in the 80s. And it's a form letter signed by J. Edgar Hoover determining how dangerous this person is. And J. Edgar Hoover identified me as a potentially dangerous person. So I've spent my life trying to live up to J. Edgar Hoover's expectations. Unfortunately, not as much as I should. But my hope for young people is that we did what we could to push the envelope. And when I did the first time I was arrested, it was as a birthing gift for my grandson, my firstborn grandson. And when I was being held, and I actually did it as Matilda Jocelyn Gage. So I'm like dressed in this 19th century costume, standing, I couldn't throw myself to the floor, and handcuffed for a few hours. And I remember, at some point that gets a little uncomfortable. And I remember at one point thinking that my right hand is reaching back toward Matilda Jocelyn Gage, and my left hand is reaching forward toward my grandson, and I'm the conduit in this moment in history. And I think that's who we are, and you will be the leadership, you are the leadership that will be moving this world forward. And you have savvy beyond anything that we had. We were coming off being 1950s good girls, at least we white women were. And I think that, you have so much more integrity and knowledge and savvy, and that's my hope. I got your back. Yes.
What role do you believe the intersection of race and gender has to do in our next coming elections?
The voter suppression, the women, that's an outstanding question, thank you. And I can just reflect on it a little bit, and then, it's what we're all thinking about and facing. The suffragists of the National American Women's Suffrage Association practice states' rights, and they let the state auxiliaries do whatever they wanted to do. That included working for the vote for white women only. That included segregating, requiring, African American women, and this is part of the whole history that we really need to bring forward in 2020. African American women organized on their own and organized, for a whole series of issues, including the vote. But they also, the state auxiliaries of the National American Women's Suffrage Association were allowed to work for Jim Crow laws, voter suppression laws. And part of the accountability that they have is that they strengthened the voter suppression laws that we're facing today. And I think for many of us, the fear of one person, one vote not functioning because of the way in which gerrymandering, voter suppression, all the ways in which, the League of Women Voters is wonderfully in the leadership of calling this out. But the role of race and gender, it's sad that the first African American woman, dropped out.
Yeah.
It's, the level of racism that we're dealing with right now is the toxic level. It's the level when it's out there. And in some ways, that's almost easier to deal with. Some women have said to me, women of color, that it's easier to deal with it because it's there and it's exposed and it's visible. But the need to call that out, the need to stand against that firmly, and what that will mean for the election, I don't know, I'd love your thoughts on it. Would you like to reflect on that? Yeah. When somebody asks a good question like that, they've obviously put a whole lot of thought into it, more than I have.
Well, I do. On one hand, I do observe that some folks that identify as white want to shy away from the institution of white privilege. And it is my own opinion that I don't shy away from it. So going on into the next elections, if you identify as white, then you have a role to play in disrupting that system and that institution.
Yes.
Because as we know right now, we African Americans, to a degree, we do have a right to vote. But to a degree, we still don't have a right to vote. So what are folks that identify as white doing in ensuring that not only African Americans, but Latinx, Asian Pacific Islanders, indigenous folks, really have the right to vote and that their voices are visible out there. We all have to engage ourselves in ensuring that we can go out there and vote.
Yes. Well said. Yeah. The role of being an ally, I think the corollary of being a recovering racist is being a self-conscious ally in all the ways possible. And that is, racism is my problem. It's not your problem. It's mine to deal with. It's mine to deal with other white sisters. You've got your lives to deal with and survival to deal with. It's our issue. And I really appreciate your comment.
And to a degree, some folks do, on one hand, you have folks that want to identify as allies, but they're passive with it.
Can you get that?
I need the mic, yeah. I'll be done.
No, this is important.
You know, for some, they want to identify as allies, but they're passive with what it means to be an ally. Okay? So if you really want to be an ally or a co-conspirator, you are going to experience discomfort.
Yes.
And that is good.
Yes.
So we can't just be passive anymore with allyism. We got to go out there and dismantle those institutions based on sexism and racism. And you are going to be uncomfortable. But like as you said, folks like Ida B. Wells, Susan B. Anthony, Gloria Steinem, all of them were uncomfortable. And that's how quite a number of us are sitting here today. So you're going to leave here and be uncomfortable, but that is good. We got to be uncomfortable in eradicating all these institutions.
If there's anybody in this room who is not registered to vote, if there's anybody in this room who has changed their address or their name, where's Jackie Klimaszewski? Jackie, you want to stand up? If there's anybody in here who needs help to make sure you are ready to vote in all elections, Jackie Klimaszewski will help you.
I would like to just say something to this group of men and women. I believe that we should all vote. I also believe we should have a choice to vote. I look at the mayor's race, it's all white men.
Yes.
Where are the women who could run for that office? They can still get nomination papers signed. We have nobody of color. We have no women, period. What does that say from the year of the woman, and how do we change that?
I think you have organizations here who are, yes, 5, I think at last count. Yeah. Thank you for the encouragement.
Do we have time for one more or not?
I have to defer to my chair. You want mine?
If it's a short question.
She's gonna allow you.
Oh.
Thank you so much for coming today. Talk just a little bit more about what is potentially waiting to kill all of us, which is climate crisis.
I think, just quickly, you've all seen the news this week. The approach of the end of life on the planet is increasing in the time frame that we have. And as it accelerates, those, we're already experiencing it. We're already into it. Indigenous people are organizing internationally, looking at strategies for sustainability with the changes that have already happened. And I think it's a double-pronged thing. We've got to turn this whole engine around. Matilda Jocelyn Gage said in the final words in her major work, Woman, Church, and State. It's online and searchable. I highly recommend it. She ended with these words: we're in the midst of a revolution such as has never been seen before. We notice beginnings. Its end, the result will be the destruction of every existing institution. The result will be a transformed world. And that may be the degree to which we have to turn this engine around. As long as we are motivated by profit and not by relationship, that's the essential difference, I think, between the Western capitalist system that we live in and the indigenous system, is that we are all related. Every bit of life is related. And until we live with that knowledge and know that we are responsible to every other life form, we're on that train. So, thank you.
Once in my life, and it was right here in front of all of you. We have Madeline McDermott with us after all. Madeline has been involved in a lot of community endeavors, but her pulsating light is climate study and climate advocacy. Come on up. As I said, Madeline received her certificate and her scholarship in front of the school, but I have something for her as well, and it is a bracelet that says, "Nevertheless, she persisted."
Thank you so much. It's very nice. I'm sorry that I was late. I have quite a bit of strength, and unfortunately, one of them isn't being on time to stuff. I don't do that. I just want to say, we've talked a lot about history and stuff, and that's really awesome. I kind of want to talk about what's happening now, and you can talk about all these issues, but part of it is that we don't just talk about issues, we live it. As the younger generation, we're always talking about oh, well, what are you going to do with your life? Well, we don't know what the world's going to look like in 50 years. We just don't. And the thing is that you talk a lot about intersectionality and stuff, which is really awesome. There's a reason that pipelines get built on indigenous land instead of other land, and there's a reason that most coal plants are close to urban Black communities. Is because they think that they can get away with it, but they can't, and that's why I do activist stuff. You've got to tell those people you can't do that anymore. That's really, really bad. And the thing is the earth is your mother and clean water is her veins. You can't just destroy things and get away with it, because we need the earth to survive. We do. And I don't know even how this happened, that people have this idea in their heads that we can just continue destroying nature and it won't affect us at all. That yeah. people think like, okay, we're over here and then the world is like over there, like nature is something that's like confined at like national parks or whatever. It's like something that you can go to see. No, it's our entire world that we live around, and we separate ourselves from it by, being in buildings, and trust me, I really like heating and stuff, but like there's there's a clear divide between like ourselves and the natural world, and we need to fix that. We need to change like our minds and our thought processes and like how we think about the systems that we live in to do anything about the threats that we face, because like the climate crisis didn't just happen. We caused it. I mean, I didn't. None of you people in this room did, but like the systems that we live under, there are people at the top that caused this. It didn't just happen. There are people responsible, and there are like ways that we live that made it possible for those people to be responsible for it and to create it. So I'm not entirely sure what else to say. I didn't write a speech last night. I was really tired, but I'm just very thankful for all of you.
I couldn't have imagined a more successful event. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming. And I can't imagine a better way of starting our year-long nonpartisan celebration than with this magnificent speaker. Dr. Wagner, thank you so much. We have just a few more minutes, and then we're going to be haunted by the phantom and we'll have to be leaving. But I want to remind all of you that if you have made a contribution with the auction baskets, Sue and Cindy are going to be collecting the money. Okay, so they have the winners, and they're going to make an announcement with that. Okay.
You have one last thing you must do. Because we're all bright, intelligent people, each table has a poinsettia. I do not want to bring them home. I brought them all here. So you have to decide who gets it at your table. You could do the senior person, the junior person. You could fight over, but I think we're much better consensus builders than that. But please, somebody at each table, take this home.
Marianne, I think that's yours.
Thank you everyone who participated in the silent auction. The winners are for the chocolate basket, Connie Radke. For the dog basket, the woman's hour basket, and the dental basket, Lynn D. Lynn, I'm sorry, I don't know how to, I couldn't read your last name. The I Am Woman basket, Claire, well, thank you. The coffee basket, Ligorna Rivera. The cleaning day basket, Jill Mitchner. The painting, Redheaded Thinking, is Barb Dorlitz. Sorry. I'm sorry, Hoffensberger, I can't pronounce anybody else's. The handcrafted Afghan, Steph Barbara. And the Christmas basket with the gnomes is Helen Everson. Thank you all. We'll be in the back corner over there. Please collect what you won, and we'll take your money. Thank you.